Welcome to The Composer's Life. I'm Nadia, your host. This episode is part of a series of interviews with professors and chairs at Berklee College of Music, where I dive into their professional careers and discuss aspects of being a professional composer and a professor. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Richard Carrick, the chair of the composition department at Berklee. So, what first drew you to music?
What first drew me to music? Well, that's a funny question. I think I was always drawn to music. There's a funny story about my mother when she was pregnant with me. My father was a jazz guitarist, and she would go to the shows, and she'd be backstage. And when the band would play, she'd hear this beating sound in her belly.
Wow.
And when the band would stop, the beating would stop. So I think I always kind of knew I was drawn to music, even before I could speak, let's say.
Wow. Yeah, that is a long time. Before even being born. That's impressive.
but 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 it was stages. I mean, I always associated with music. Like music made sense in a way that words didn't always make sense. I was born in France, and then I moved to the US when I was 5. And back then, they would just put you in school. And nobody told my teachers that I didn't speak English. And so I was kind of a shy kid, and I kind of fumbled through school for a few months. And then my parents went to the parent teacher conference in November or whatever. And they said, well, how's he doing? Because, he doesn't speak English. And the teacher had no idea.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
literally nobody told the teachers that I was not an English speaker. Um, she just thought I was really shy. So
Wow.
I think that must have done something to my psyche where, like, listening to sounds made a lot of sense, and words were, I'm much happier with words now and communicate fine. But there's something about sounds, and there's something about the physical experience of it that I miss it physically if I don't make music and don't listen to music. So I've always been involved with music, but then the point at which I decided to go professionally into it, that was a lot later.
So, did you play guitar as a kid because your dad played guitar, or what was your first instrument?
I didn't actually. My first instrument was piano. My parents were like, we didn't have much money, and so my parents were always, they wanted to like encourage us the best they can, and so my dad thought it'd be really important for me to play piano at a young age. So I started when we moved to this country. We bought like a $5 piano that I think my dad had to like repaint with house paint. It was really
Yeah.
and and that's the piano. I started playing on this piano, and we had this piano in the house. I didn't play guitar until high school, really, but I started on piano, and then I did kind of classical piano for throughout my entire youth.
Did you enjoy piano as a child because of school was hard, or how did you feel
I
about it?
Yeah, I think I always liked piano. I didn't like to practice, which was a bit of a problem, but then I became really good at playing by ear. And so I was one of the kids who like didn't read so well, but then just could kind of figure it all out. Um, and that kind of takes you only so far.
Yeah.
So there's a certain point where I was like 10 or 11, I realized, oh, I've really got to get this reading thing down. But I think I always really loved the piano. I mean, you could play so many different things, so many different styles. Everyone was, you know, gravitated to the piano in a way. Like, I
Hmm.
would see my dad play guitar, and he always needed like a band to play with him. I'm like, I don't
Hmm.
need a band. I can do this all by myself. This is a great instrument.
I'm better than you, Dad. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I wouldn't say that. He was a funny. He's no longer with us, but he was as I mentioned, jazz guitarist, but also a rock guitarist, and he was really into punk. He was from London, and he liked so many cool styles of music. We had the Beatles, Sergeant Pepper on our mantelpiece, and we had Sex Pistols, Never Mind the Bollocks, up there. And there was a point where I was like 13, 14, I just didn't really know how to rebel against somebody who's got the Sex Pistols like proudly displayed in our living room.
Yeah.
So I decided to really get into Beethoven. And I was practicing Beethoven, and he did not like classical music. So
That's so funny.
I'd
So it's
play
kind of an
Beethoven.
opposite
Yeah,
story from the usual.
he would yell at me, "Stop with the Beethoven."
That is really funny. So, at what point did you start composing music?
I think officially, I guess I started in end of high school and then the beginning of college. But I think unofficially, I was always tinkering with music. Like when I'd play Beethoven, I was always like adding extra octaves in the bass and stuff like that. And I didn't do it because I thought it was better than Beethoven, obviously not. But it was just like, oh, this would sound better. It was only later that I realized Beethoven actually didn't have access to that lowest octave.
Mm,
If he had, he probably would have used it. So I was always kind of tinkering with music and expanding. Um, and then when I went to college, I took an introduction to composition class. And then when I was in high school, I didn't realize you could compose. Like I would write music, I would write jazz charts, I would write like had ideas for orchestral music, and I would write them down, but I didn't think that was something you could really do,
mm.
because I didn't have very good teachers and things like that. And so,
Do
um,
as in a career?
right,
Okay.
yeah, exactly, like a living composer. I thought it was just film music and that
Mm,
type of stuff, which would have been cool. But then when I went to college, I realized, oh no, you can actually there are career paths here, and you can do all this stuff. So that's when I got serious about it and started delving into what my own ideas were
mm.
in music.
So, what were you originally going to college for?
Oh, that's a long that's a long question. I actually went to engineering school.
Oh,
Um, and then after a year, I transferred to the college, at the university, and so I was always good in maths and things like that, and so I enjoyed that. But there was a point where I realized I didn't really want to be an engineer, and so I switched. I studied mathematics and I studied music.
were your parents happy when you did that?
My parents, the, they would always say, study what you want, but have a backup plan. And so the backup plan was engineering. And then when I transferred, the backup plan was mathematics. And I ended up never using my math degree. Like I probably should have, but
Really?
but it probably would have paid off a little bit more. Who knows? but um, but that was, yeah. I mean, they were always very supportive. But have the backup plan.
Yeah. So once you decided to study, was it composition that you officially studied?
It was just a general music degree, but yeah, the focus was on composition, and I was writing and organizing concerts and things.
Wow, that's really cool. So out of college, what did you do? Did you have a plan set up, kind of a thing, or
Um, I wish I had a plan. I think of you and the Berkeley students. I know we put a lot of pressure on you all, but you guys have much clearer ideas about what you're going to do when you leave college than I did. I was in a bit of an idealistic state. I went straight to graduate school in music composition, and I went to the place where I thought the coolest music was happening. That was, and with where really interesting people were, really bright people that I wanted to kind of study from and be around, and it was a great experience. But um, I went straight to my master's, and then I took a year off, and then I went to Holland to the conservatory, and then I went back. So I was at UCSD in San Diego. Um, for my graduate program, and then I had this extra year in Holland. And by that point, it was kind of like composition was clearly the career. But right after college, I knew I wanted to compose, but I didn't really know what that meant.
hmm.
So I went to the graduate program.
Did the graduate program help you find your path?
It created a path. Um, all graduate programs, they're very specific. Every program prepares you in a different way,
Mm.
and I don't know how well I understood what the UCSD path was when I went there, but it definitely prepared me very well for the things it does well, you know. And yeah, I mean, I'm happy I went to graduate school. Maybe I went right after college. Maybe that was a little too early. I was definitely the youngest person who started in the program.
Mm.
Um, and I probably could have benefited from having a year or two off before doing that.
Hmm.
But I don't know what else I would have done. Like being a freelance composer with an undergraduate degree in New York City, that seemed a little daunting. Kind
Yeah.
of, kind of wanted the bit of the seclusion and the time to think and develop ideas on my own and stuff.
Mm. So, did you go to New York after your master's degree?
Yeah, I was in New York for college, and then I went back.
Oh, I see. So,
back
it was just your graduate degree that you did in San
yeah,
Diego?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when you went back to New York, did you feel a bit more prepared for
I
life?
felt very prepared. I was like, here I am, let's do it. And then I started meeting people, and they're like, I've never heard of you, but I've heard of this undergraduate for the last 2 years. So get in line. And that was a little frustrating because
Mm.
when you don't do your graduate work in New York City, then you don't have the network, right? So it took a while to kind of build that up. And I think that's why I started my own ensemble. I co founded it with David Shively, a friend of mine, and because we got out of graduate school and we're like, let's just start doing our own thing here.
Did you kind of know musicians that you started the ensemble with?
Yeah, we had a network from UCSD that we started with, and then we started expanding in New York City with
Very cool.
years that we knew.
Did you have to rent a space to start your ensemble, or how did
Oh,
that work?
starting ensemble in New York City is like,
Yeah,
that's no fun, man.
I
Yeah,
can't imagine.
no, you can't even rent a space. Too expensive to rent space. We would rent like the hours that we needed for the rehearsal in right. We didn't even have our own space.
Hmm.
Um, and sometimes we'd rehearse at each other's places and wherever we could find rehearsal space. I was adjuncting at NYU for a few years, so we rehearsed at NYU a lot, and I
Nice.
adjuncted at I was teaching at Columbia for a while, so we rehearsed at Columbia when we could. So you're always kind of New York City, and space is a big topic.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So while you were starting your ensemble, you were also teaching a bit at those
Yeah, that's
universities.
right. That's right. I decided as a composer after graduate school, I looked around, I thought, the type of music I'm writing, it's not film music, it's not super popular stuff, it's not like John Adams, it's not Philip Glass music. It's not going to have it's I don't think I can survive off of this stuff like in and of itself. So I have to do something else. And so what do I want to do while I kind of build the composing side is I decided to go into teaching, and I decided to run the ensemble and not be like a freelance pianist, but more go into teaching and then run the ensemble and do projects that seem really interesting.
Mm.
So yeah, I was teaching kind of all over. I taught with the New York Phil. I taught at a pre-college uh, up in Westchester. I taught with the different orchestras in town, and then I started teaching at the universities.
Okay. With your ensemble, would you have performances that people would pay to come see, or how did that work?
Yeah, we were a professional ensemble. It started off like we started off doing music that we weren't hearing in New York. That was the goal of the group. Is there
Mm.
was a lot of great music happening in Europe, happening in the West Coast, and also even happening in New York that wasn't being played in mainstream kind of New York areas. So we started playing that music, and it's stuff that we had played while we were at UCSD, but then also expanded from that. And it was funny, it was kind of esoteric music. I mean, we did a Helmut Lachemann festival in 2008, and it was sold out, and it was I mean, it's just like packed. You know, there were people out the door. Um, for Helmut Lachenmann, I mean, he's very famous in avant-garde circles, but um, there's something about New York. New Yorkers want to know interesting music.
Mm.
They're interested in stuff they don't already know, and so that's kind of what we were doing. And we weren't really trying to build a big following, but people were coming to our concerts, so it was pretty exciting.
That is really cool. That was a good idea then to do music that wasn't being done. So do you still have the ensemble today?
Yeah, the ensemble still runs. Since I'm in Boston, I'm not in New York, and my co-director, who I mentioned previously, Dave, he left the ensemble, so I'm running it now with a curator, Chris McIntyre, and then the musicians are still amazing, but we don't do as many shows as we used to. Also, the pandemic hit
Mm.
performances, performance ensembles pretty hard,
Mm-hmm.
and so venues don't really have the ability to kind of support live music in the same way they used to and stuff like that. So it's been kind of challenging. You know, we have like a smaller schedule now than we used to.
Mm-hmm. What is your ensemble called, by the way?
Either or.
Either or. Awesome.
I'll tell you why I started the group. So as a composer, one of the big challenges when you leave school is how do you stay involved in music, and how do you keep learning, and how do you keep engaged as like our job is to sit at our desk and not talk to people, right? But the other side of our job is to collaborate with musicians and work with performers and be in part of the compositional discourse of the day, what other composers are writing, what performers are excited about, and so forth. And so I started the group in part because I wanted to keep having a funnel of new and interesting music in my life. I didn't want to just go to concerts. Like sometimes when you go to a concert, it can be great, and sometimes it's just okay. But when you have to perform a piece, man, that's the jet fuel for me. Like when I perform a piece, then I really know the piece, and then it gives me so many ideas about my own music. Not to imitate it, but just that visceral feeling, that excitement of bringing something alive. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so I think that's kind of selfishly why I started the group, was just to kind of keep me tapped into what's happening in the world.
Was
For
it
me,
outside? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask, was it outside of your comfort zone as well to do something like that?
Uh, it was, yeah. I mean, I think it's always interesting to push yourself. You know, every concert, like we started doing bigger concerts. We started doing more challenging works. We played this Lachaman piece. It's a 25-minute piece for guitar, speaking guitarist, and I don't really play guitar, so it took me like a year to learn this piece.
Wow.
And and we once did a concert where we premiered 125 pieces in one evening, you know. And I think it probably would have been in the Guinness Book of World Records had we invited them. We didn't know we were supposed to invite them.
Oh, no.
But uh so like those types of challenges, they're really, or I played a piece by Morton Feldman, which is 4.5 hours long,
Hmm.
where we kind of play continuously as a trio with my dear friends. And so, yeah, as a performer, I was always kind of looking to push myself a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of exciting. The nerves that come with that are also the greater the challenge, the greater the reward, I guess, is the
Mm.
way to
How
look at
long was the 125 piece concert?
it. Oh, that was, so they were 1 minute pieces.
Okay.
It was co-commissioned by a really interesting group out of Leipzig, and it was called the John Cage Party Pieces. And for John Cage's centenary of his birth, they decided to commission 100 composers to write 1 minute pieces. Half of them were German, half were American. And they asked me to write one of the pieces. And when I wrote it, it was this funny thing where, like, you get the last measure of the piece that the other composer wrote. So you only see their last measure. Then you write your 1 minute piece. then you send it in, and the last measure of your piece is what gets sent to the next composer.
That is a really cool concept.
And after I wrote it, I said to the director, I was like, "So who's going to play this?" And he's like, "We have no idea." And I was like, "Well, I have this group and I conduct." So we ended up doing the premiere at Miller Theater in New York City, and it ended up being 125 pieces.
Wow.
The concert was over 2 hours long. It was probably 2.5 hours long, something like
Yeah,
that.
that is
It was
really
cool.
cool. Yeah. So at what point did you move to Boston?
I moved to Boston in 2016, um, because I got this job at Berklee, and that was a very interesting time to move. I'd been in New York, um, musically. I think every few years I'd get influenced by something new. Like as a composer, I don't know if it's the same for you, but for me, I'm like, there are things that I'm interested that are kind of self-generated, and then there are things that come in from the outside that really interest me. And there was a period where I started really getting into Korean gugak music, which is traditional music from Korea, because I had been visiting there for work, and um, I got really into that music for a while, and it kind of started influencing my own composing. And then I had this opportunity to leave New York for a year with a fellowship, and we ended up moving to Rwanda and with my family, and that was really great because it was like it couldn't have been more different than New York, and it couldn't have been more different than the Korean music I was studying. And so that was really interesting place to be. And then from there I ended up in Boston, um, with this job. And so I've been in Boston since then, and kind of having um, all sorts of influences. I think the Berklee experience is really really unique.
Hmm.
I think maybe that's kind of where I'm at these days. Is like, there's so many interesting colleagues. There's so many jazz musicians that do really avant-garde stuff, and I do this avant-garde stuff, and I'm really interested in jazz. So it's like there's so many connections to be had at Berklee. It's a really interesting place.
Hmm. So going back a bit, so you went to Korea for a bit
Oh, I
to
was just
study?
visiting. Yeah, I would go for like a few weeks at a time.
Was
Uh,
it for work or was it just for
it was
pleasure?
for work. I was working with the New York Philharmonic, their education department, and teaching the very young composers program, which was founded by John Deek, who's the associate principal bassist of the New York Phil, and had a passion for bringing composition to young kids. And this program, once the New York Phil started doing international education work, this program was one of the programs that really caught on. They had other programs as well, um, of course, that were very popular, but that was the program I was teaching in. And so we went to Korea, we went to Japan, London, and then I started a version of it in Rwanda, and I started a version of it in Tel Aviv as well.
Oh,
But when I went to Korea, it was so funny because we went there, and the first time we went there was for like a week, and they loved the program. And we had in 1 week we had 12 9 to 12 year old kids. They were orphans actually. They wrote from day one, where they had not written a single note of music, to day five, finished a piece for orchestra, a whole piece. And each one of those 12 kids wrote a piece. And on day six, we performed the pieces. It wasn't with
wow.
the New York Phil, it was with a local orchestra. And it was totally inspiring. So that started like a 7 year period of me going to Korea and working with this organization and developing this program. We ended up having, I think it was like 20 sites throughout Korea doing this program. I was mentoring the teachers to teach this program. They had at one point like a few thousand students in this program. It was really impressive how quickly it grew, and how
Yeah,
you know,
that would be a really inspiring experience.
Yeah, it was really cool. And the whole time I'd go there and I'd say to the kids, um, well, you guys should be writing for Korean traditional instruments. And they would say, no, we don't really know those. We know Western instruments because they don't study traditional instruments in school.
Hmm.
And then I realized I didn't know the Korean traditional instruments. So I started studying them. And that's what got me really interested in the music and
Hmm.
starting to hear the musicians live and the gugak musicians that are in Korea, and there are many in New York as well. They're phenomenal musicians. They're great improvisers. They play notated music. They can play chamber music, solo. They're just incredible musicians, and that was very inspiring. So, just kind of being around that community uh, just got me really excited. And then I studied the music just a little bit uh,
Hmm.
one summer.
And then, so when you went to Rwanda, were you there to start the same program in
No,
that
I
country?
was there. No, it was unrelated. We ended up there for family reasons.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but um, but it turns out that um, there is a small Korean community there, and I got to know the ambassador, and I got to know the Korean community there because I was like, you know, in Rwanda, there's this white guy who's really into Korean traditional music.
Right. It doesn't really fit.
So that was really nice. And
That's really
I
cool.
was even able to find in one of the villages in Rwanda, there was a woman who was teaching there who also played Korean traditional kayagam. It's just unbelievable. Like these connections are so deep. It was so interesting. And so
Yeah, that
we
would be.
performed together a little bit when we were out there. It was really cool.
That is awesome. How did studying the Korean traditional music kind of change your own composition of music?
It's a good question. For me, when I first heard gugak music, what struck me is how powerful the music is. It has a directness, an honesty, a natural quality to it. The instruments are you hear the making of the instrument as well. You hear like the plucking, you hear the grit that takes to make the instrument. In the hagum, you hear the bowing starting, you hear the fingers move, and that's very appealing, as well as the just directness of the music and the powerfulness. Um, and so for me, it sounded like really intense avant-garde music. Even though
Hmm.
it only uses four notes, usually, sometimes five notes.
Wow, I didn't know
Um,
that.
but the sounds themselves, the virtuosity of the performances, it sounded to me it sounded like avant-garde, really cool avant-garde music.
Hmm.
Rhythmically, it's very complex. It's very interesting. There's also this strong improvisational element in the music that is freeing and liberating and virtuosic. So when I heard the music, I was like, "Oh, this is more of what I'm already kind of interested in." Right? But then, of course, it comes from a completely different tradition. It has nothing to do with Western avant-garde music. So then I was really kind of interested in getting to know a little bit of that history and how the music's actually put together and uh,
Hmm.
things like that.
So once you became, I guess you've always taught while being a composer, but once you became, were you chair of the composition department when you came to Berklee?
Yeah. So I I've always been teaching. I think I was teaching even in high school and college. Not in college, but in graduate school, I would teach piano and things. And when I came to Berklee, I got hired as chair.
How did you balance, and how do you balance being chair with your own music and creating and still doing that?
Very carefully. Um, I think I think you just have priorities. You have life priorities. Um, you also are really clear about what you accept as your responsibilities. Um, And when I took this job, I don't think I understood the scope of the job necessarily. I mean, I was aware of it, of course, in terms of the numbers, because it's a large faculty, it's a really large school, it's a diverse community, it's a very active and inventive place. Things are always changing and moving forward. And so I was aware of that on some level, but then when you take the gig, you're like, oh, wow, this is incredible what's happening here. I don't think I was ready for the depth of how much was happening at that institution.
Hmm.
So it's both invigorating, but there's also a point where you have to kind of say, how do you do this without burning out or without it taking over your life and things like that? And so everyone finds their own balance. I mean, I think I think you have to be clear about what you want to do and what you think is important for you to do, as opposed to just doing what comes next and what's available at the time.
Hmm.
You know, you also have to kind of plan things out. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's that different than when I was a freelancer. Maybe things move differently. But when I freelanced in New York, you're constantly just saying, like, oh, do I want to do this gig? Do I want to take on this teaching for a year? Or do I want to focus on something else?
Hmm.
Um, I think the other thing is like the Berklee job is it has waves. So there are like certain months where it's super intense, and there's certain months where you have a bit more flexibility. There's not the time sensitivity of every day visiting artists and things like that. So understanding where those pockets are really helps in terms of composing. But I mean, I was composing. It's funny. I was like my first 2 years in that job, I was writing a lot of music,
Hmm.
and I still compose a lot, but um, you find a balance somehow. Otherwise, you know, the job is really cool and composing is really cool, but um, I don't think I could just compose 24 hours a day, and I don't think I could just do that job 24 hours a day.
Hmm. So it kind of balances itself out for you.
I think so. I think it was also helpful to move to a new city and have a community
Hmm.
that I was a part of, as opposed to moving to Boston without a job.
Hmm.
So that was nice, even though it meant I was working a lot.
Yeah. When you sit down to compose something, what does your process look like from start to finish?
Oh, that's a good question. What does my process look like? Um, First of all, I think the thing that doesn't really happen is when I sit down to compose. I think sitting is one of the last steps of composing. I think for me, composing happens a lot more through listening, through um, there's a lot of pre-composing, let's say, that's so vital that if I sit down and I try to compose and I haven't been thinking about things and I haven't been kind of getting my head around what I want to do, then nothing's going to come out. It's not in the right state. So sitting down to compose notes is only happens after I've done a lot of other things. And what those things might be really changes over time. Currently I'm writing a lot of piano music, so it's stuff that I'm kind of working out at the piano usually. But just as often, I'll leave the piano and I'll think about something to do when I go back to the piano, and then I'll try to apply it.
Hmm.
But I tend to write from beginning to end. You know, I tend to write on paper. If you're looking for technical questions,
Yeah, sure.
technical answers, um, and I tend to write in spurts. So like I'll try to write like a whole movement or something in one day, and then if
Uh,
that doesn't go well, then the next day I have free. I'll try to just do it again, and I kind of like start again from the beginning, but this time I kind of see where I went awry and I kind of do it better.
hmm.
So I try to write kind of, I don't know what you would call that. spontaneously or kind of through composed or something,
Hmm.
uh, rather than just having a lot of pre-compositional structures. But I spent years sketching out harmonies for my pieces and rhythmic layers and things like that. So that's embedded in the way I think about music.
Mm.
So if I write something at the beginning, I know that it can be used in different ways later on. I don't have to pre-compose that.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who is starting out in composing?
I would say you really have to trust your instincts, and you have to, and what that means is actually invest in your instincts. Don't put your instincts over other people's instincts. When you study with a teacher and they tell you to do something, it might be a good idea, it might not be a good idea. The only thing that really matters is that your instincts are telling you to do it. And I don't mean the instincts of pleasing someone, I mean your musical instincts. What do you think? Because the instincts are the only thing you're going to have throughout your whole life. People are going to change, situations are going to change, the culture is going to change, everything's going to change. But your instincts, if you know how to tap into your own instincts, you can trust them. You remember, oh, that one time, remember I had that instinct, it was horrible, like it went really wrong. So I know next time when I get that instinct, I know what to do next time, you
Hmm.
know. That's the important thing, because the second you start listening to other people, then you're always going to need those other voices to do anything. So I would say trust your own instincts.
Well, thank you for the interview today. I enjoyed talking.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It's so nice to reconnect with you, Nadia.
Yeah.
I wish
Yeah,
you
it was
good
great.
luck with everything with the podcast, and I hope
Thank
it
you.
was interesting for your listeners.
Yes, I'm sure it will be. I would have asked like hundreds more questions if we had time.
Next time.
Um, yeah. Thank you so much for listening to this episode today. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Richard, and you can find all of his information in the episode description. I'll see you next time on The Composer's Life.